Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, Trump and the GOP need to stay locked in on the economy for 2026. We've got a recent op-ed from the president and more coming up. And a good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand by checking out the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen online by visiting the website, nickcraig.com. Our show this morning is brought to you by Melissa Gott and the team over at the Law Group in Wilmington. You can visit them online. We encourage you to visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. You have heard me say many times that one of the biggest issues that will define what success does or does not look like for the Republican Party in 2026 is going to be the domestic economy. And it's crazy to think here, even though we only just kicked off the new year, we're almost 10% through the way of 2026 already. And obviously, the 2026 midterm elections are in November. So we are rapidly approaching Election Day. And yes, I know the midterms haven't even been here yet. Those take place coming up here in about a month or so. So I get it. There's still a lot of time. But with the economy, it being such a large issue, it is not something that you do or fix or deal with quickly, right? That is the unfortunate reality, or maybe fortunate, depending on the argument that you're trying to make, side of the economy. It's not something quick. It's not something that moves at a rapid rate. Now, yes, there are economic levers and handles that can be pulled. There's been plenty of discussion in recent months about the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell and what they can do with interest rates. So there are plenty of things that can affect. There are plenty of things that can have an impact on the overall U.S. economy. I'm not trying to mitigate that or shuffle or brush that to the side. There are important things. But you have to add all of that stuff together to have major economic impact, a major economic change. And so before we get into an op-ed that the president himself published over at the Wall Street Journal this weekend with the headline, Donald J. Trump, my tariffs have brought America back. Before we get into that, I wanted to look at some recent polling that has come out from two different sources. I pulled a poll from Fox News, which was released on January the 29th, and a poll from Emerson College that was released in mid-January. Just two, for the case of this discussion and conversation, just two polls to kind of lay out and walk through what the current feeling is on the economy. So I'm going to start off with the Fox News poll that was out in the field over the last couple of weeks, and it continues to show that the economy remains a major issue. This poll, which was conducted the 23rd through 26th of January, published on the 29th of January, shows that 40% of individuals approve of the economy right now, while 59% disapprove. Now, that number back in July of last year was in the mid-40s. It's been between, looking at some of these polls and some of the averages, somewhere between 38 and 44 over the past 6 or 8 months. So that's kind of the swing, that's the sway in what folks feel about the economy. It's underwater right now, and pretty significantly, almost 20 points in the most recent poll here from Fox News. This was one of the questions in the poll. What do you think should be Donald Trump's top priority as president? I like these questions. With 19% of respondents, economy and jobs was the top issue, which, as you've heard me state before, is almost always the top issue. Some mixture of the economy and jobs and the inflation. Now, this is interesting because the next response, again, what do you think the president should do? What should his top priority be? Is inflation and prices. So when you add those two things together, 19% and 17%, doing math on the radio is always a risky venture, that brings you to 36%, which is by far the largest plurality of any response to this question. What should his top priority be? Which I'll note, by the way, the second largest option if you combine the economy and inflation. 15% of people say he should resign or quit. This poll from Fox News had a pretty even split of Republicans and Democrats, something like 41% Democrats, 43% Republicans. So a pretty even down the road split. And as you can imagine, a lot of the Democrats, left-leaning individuals who responded to this poll told Fox News that he should quit or resign from his position. I don't think that is going to happen, unfortunately, for the respondents of this poll. They're just going to have to keep waiting and wishing that this comes to fruition. But back to the top two issues, the economy and jobs, inflation and prices. It's a large percentage of people. 36% of the poll respondents say, hey, this is what needs to be dealt with. This needs to be the top priority for the president. Moving down with some other issues on the poll right now. Do you think President Trump is spending too much time, not enough time, or just the right amount of time on a variety of issues? In the case of the economy, only 8% feel like he's spending too much time. 24% say he's spending about the right amount of time. But this is the huge number. 68% of people say that he is not spending enough time on the economy. And so I've made the point before, and I will continue to make it as we go through the remainder of this year. The focus not only of the president, but of Congress, Mike Johnson, who's the leader in the House, John Thune, who is the leader in the Senate, their North Star for the remainder of this year, all the way leading up to November, needs to be hammering on the economy. The polling is in. The data is in. These are the only two examples I'm bringing to you. I pulled a whole bunch of polls and looked at it, but these were the two that had some of the more interesting questions and responses. It's all pretty clear. It's all pretty obvious. The economy remains one of, if not the top issue for voters. And rounding out the Fox News poll, this was another interesting question, why I really liked this poll. During the next year, do you think that the economy will get better, get worse, or stay about the same? 23% of people said that it would stay about the same. 32% said it would get better. But the largest number, once again, 45% of people said that it would get worse. So it is an uphill battle, and it is something that there needs to be a major spotlight on from the administration. We saw the president last week. Trying to remember what state he was in. He was in, I think, Michigan or somewhere in the northern half of the country, talking about the economy. Had a major announcement, or major announcements as it relates to the economy. We saw last week that John Deere made a huge announcement that they are going to be building tractors here and excavators here in the United States, fully in the United States, with a very little foreign input, for complete assembly line production start to finish here stateside. So we are seeing the economic announcements trickle up. We are seeing the announcements from the president and from the administration. But because the economy is so vast, because the economy is such a large thing to deal with, it takes a long time for most of this stuff to trickle down. And I'm not necessarily talking about trickle down economics, but it takes time for these announcements to play out, right? You see business announces adding, 5,000 new jobs as they get to 2030, right? These are, especially if it's in manufacturing where they have to build a large plant, a large assembly line facility. That thing with permitting and all of the fun delays that you deal with as it relates to the process of building something in any state across the country with state and federal regulations, those things can take years to get off the ground. So you've got years worth of construction, which, yes, does add to the economy. You get construction workers that are, of course, physically building the plant or building the factory or putting the building together. But it can take 3, 5, 7+ years before you get the individuals that are working in the sector that has been announced actually into their job. And so as you look at all of this data, as you see the announcements, as we go through some of the details in the president's op-ed over at the Wall Street Journal, which we'll do here coming up in just a couple of minutes, it is obvious that this needs to be the focus. And I think I can say pretty accurately right now that the administration understands this. The president, to his credit, this is the thing that I might give him the most credit for, he has surrounded himself with very good, smart people. Those individuals know what needs to be done. They know what the heartbeat, the pulse is of the American public, and they understand what needs to be focused on as we head into 2026. Turning our attention over to this opinion piece, this op-ed that ran over at the Wall Street Journal this weekend. The headline of the story is, "My Tariffs Have Brought America Back. The experts predicted market crashes, massive inflation, and recession. They were all wrong." And it was penned by Donald J. Trump, and it published January the 30th. It ran physically in the weekend paper, the weekend print version of the Wall Street Journal. So let's just dig into it. Let's go through some of what the president has to say in this piece. It starts off, "When I imposed historic tariffs on nearly all foreign countries last April, the critics said my policies would cause a global economic meltdown," which I think he is right to say that was, in fact, the case. "Instead, they have created an American economic miracle, and we are quickly building the greatest economy in the history of the world, with other countries doing just fine. Countless so-called experts, including those featured frequently in the Wall Street Journal, predicted confidently that the Trump tariffs would crash stock markets, crush economic growth, cause massive inflation, destroy American exports, and trigger a worldwide recession. 9 months later, the results are in. Every one of those predictions has been proven completely and totally wrong. Since I was elected in 2024, we have had 52 stock market highs with virtually no inflation. There has never been anything like it." Very interesting. Now, the president highlights the stock market highs, which is absolutely true and absolutely the case. You can argue whether that's a good indicator or not, which I would be open to listening to the argument on that. What you can argue against is that since he has been elected, and there's only 52 weeks in a year, you've had 52 stock market highs in that period of time. He's only been in office a little more than a year. And in terms of inflation, he's done a very good job at managing that to the side while you watch the Federal Reserve continue to toy around and not do anything as it relates to interest rates. But inflation is not the major issue. Inflation is not the major discussion that you are seeing play out right now. It was back in 2022. What did you have? 9.5% inflation in the summer of 2022. And what did you hear? Oh, it's transitory. That was the word that was used. It's not real inflation. It's not actually happening. It's just a weird economic indicator. Don't pay any mind to it. Meanwhile, prices across the economy absolutely exploded. Going to the grocery store was insanely expensive. But hey, folks, it was just transitory. So it's rather interesting that the so-called experts, right, the economists, and I have plenty of friends that are in the economic sector, appreciate them, great insight from them. But many, not the folks on the right, but many of the so-called economists that you see on TV, that you read over at places like the Wall Street Journal, didn't have a whole hell of a lot to say about the inflation, about the economy during 2022. They were all puppeting the same garbage from Janet Yellen and the rest of the federal government, which was that inflation was just transitory. The president has done a very good job handling the inflation issue. I'm not going to sit here, and nobody can, and take anything away from him on that. The president continues in his op-ed. I inherited an economy ravaged by the radical policies of sleepy Joe Biden and his allies in Congress. Their trillions of dollars in wasteful spending and their extremist green energy agenda created the worst inflation in more than 40 years, costing the typical American family $33,000 in real wealth. The Biden years were defined by misery known as stagflation, high inflation, and low growth. He's 100% spot on about that as well. A major issue there. Only 12 months into my second term in office, we now have the exact opposite: extremely low inflation and extraordinarily high economic growth. Hard to argue with that. You might not like the president. You might not like what he's doing policy-wise. You can't really argue about the economic growth that is real, it exists in data, and the extremely low inflation. He continues by saying, in the third quarter of 2025, gross domestic product, also known as GDP growth, was booming at 4.4%. And despite the Democrat-induced shutdown last fall, which cost us at least 1 point, the fourth quarter is projected by the Atlanta Fed to be well over 5%, a number like our country has not seen in many years. Meanwhile, annual core inflation for the past 3 months has dropped to just 1.4%, far lower than almost anyone other than me had predicted. Economic growth does not cause inflation. In fact, often it does the exact opposite. Real incomes for typical workers rose $1,000, $2,000, or even more last year, increasing much faster than consumer prices, which is kind of the chart that you need to look at, right? If you've got consumer prices skyrocketing and wages that are not keeping up with that, it by definition becomes more expensive to live. It by definition becomes less affordable. That was really the dirty little secret that was going on during the Biden administration. Wages, yes, were going up, as for the most part, they always typically do. But because the overall economy was in such a miserable spot, you may have made an extra $5,000 or $10,000, but you were being squeezed out by all of these other economic pressures. Gas was sky high, through the roof. Inflation, as I mentioned, 9.5% in the summer of 2022. So unless you were getting a 50% raise at work, you weren't seeing any of the benefits. You weren't seeing any of the advantages of that money because everything else was so expensive. In many cases, you were just treading water, or in others, you were actually underwater somehow, making more money, which seems like it would be almost impossible, but that's what we were dealing with. Wages far outpaced inflation. Since Liberation Day, the stock market has skyrocketed, with the strong possibility that we will soon break $50,000 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, something which everyone thought was impossible, at least in 1 year. So the president is laying out what he took over, and that is a good thing. And I know some folks on the left, and you'll even see some on the right, say, oh, stop crying over spilled milk. We're past the Biden administration. Why do you keep talking about it? It is important to understand what was taken over. When you are laying out, and as the case here, the president is doing in the Wall Street Journal, when you are laying out what you have done, when you are laying out what your successes are, you need to have a starting point, right? To track anything, to track any metric, you need some place where zero exists, where you start a graph, start a chart, start some level of metric. And so that zero starting point was the disaster that was the Joe Biden administration. And understanding what that was, what the economy was under the previous administration, and what it meant for real everyday American people is a very important part of this equation, right? We don't have blinders on. We're not living in a silo. Yes, the administration changed. Yes, there was a different presidential election, but there was plenty of holdover and plenty of issues because we're talking about the economy, which is such a large, vast machine that need to and should factor in and play into what the president is talking about. So we continue with the president's op-ed over at the Wall Street Journal this weekend, laying out this case. He continues by saying, Joe Biden handed me a catastrophically high budget deficit and the highest trade deficit in world history. But with the help of tariffs, we have cut that federal budget deficit by a staggering 27% in a single year. And even more incredibly, we have slashed our monthly trade deficit by an astonishing 77%, all with virtually no inflation, which everyone said could not be done. American exports are up by $150 billion. Domestic steel production is up by more than 300,000 tons a month. It's a pretty sizable, significant number. And factory construction is up by 42% since 2022. China's share of U.S. imports have reached the lowest level since China entered the World Trade Organization all the way back in 2001, and hundreds of billions of dollars more are pouring into the United States. I sincerely hope that the Supreme Court is watching these numbers because our country has never seen anything like them. The president is, of course, highlighting there the major Supreme Court case that we could be expecting any day now as it relates to the president's tariffs. There are legal challenges. I know you're shocked that things that the president have done are being litigated in court. I know, incredibly shocking information here on the Nick Craig Show. So the Supreme Court is weighing this case over whether the president has the authority for these wide-sweeping tariffs. The oral arguments have happened, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they come down on this. If they allow the president to operate in this manner, or if they say, President Trump, you've overstepped your bounds. You are not allowed to use these wide-sweeping tariffs as it relates to economic policy. So there's been rumblings that ruling has been coming for weeks. We still wait for it here on this Tuesday, so it's not immediately clear. It really could come at this point at any time from the United States Supreme Court. Back to the op-ed. Just over 1 year ago, we were a dead country. Now we are the hottest country anywhere in the world. The entire Trump economic agenda deserves credit for this explosion of growth and good news, including our record tax cuts, unprecedented regulation cuts, pro-American energy policies, and much more. I'm going to put a pin where we are in this article right now. The regulation cuts are never really talked about. Yeah, you hear it in maybe passing conversation, but if you really want to talk about allowing business to thrive, if you really want to talk about building a culture that works for businesses in the United States, the quickest, easiest, and most surefire way to do it is to lessen the burden of government, strip out red tape, and cut regulation. There was an article today over at CarolinaJournal.com, a new group, not a new group, but a new survey from the group called the Business Facilities. It's a magazine that, based on the name, covers a variety of business topics, named North Carolina the 2025 State of the Year for Economic Development. And with that announcement, with that information, CNBC also ranked the state the top state for business last year. That is in large part due to the fact that the North Carolina General Assembly, which has fortunately been controlled by Republicans now for 15 years, has cut burdensome regulation, has cut red tape, and has allowed business to do business. I know, it's a novel concept. Businesses know what's best. Businesses know when it makes sense to adopt and spend money and invest and build and do all of those things. Businesses knows how to do that. When it doesn't make sense for them to do it, they don't do it. When it does make sense, they do. They're very good at that. And when you've got big government standing in the way with all of its bureaucratic regulation and all of its bureaucratic red tape, it stifles business. The president has continued to highlight the importance of cutting regulation. You talk about lighting a bottle rocket under the economy, no better way to do it than cut red tape and get government out of the way. That is the way that this plays out. That is the way that this is supposed to work. Allow business to do business. Stop standing in the way. Back to the op-ed from President Trump. But without question, the credit for this economic success must go to what the Wall Street Journal itself described as the largest economic policy shock in more than 50 years, my tariffs. We have proven decisively that properly applied tariffs do not hurt growth. They promote growth and greatness, just as I said all along. The Wall Street Journal has charged repeatedly that tariffs are nothing but a tax on American consumers, which is proven to be totally false. Experiences since Liberation Day have proven that this analysis is not only far too simplistic, it is absolutely wrong. The data shows that the burden or incidence of tariffs have fallen overwhelmingly on foreign producers and middlemen, including the largest corporations that are not from the United States. According to a recent study by the Harvard Business School, these groups are paying at least 80% of the tariff cost. Now, this is where I break a little bit from the president. I don't completely agree with him and his analysis here that the tariffs are not just essentially a tax on middle-class Americans. As I was just stating, business does business. Yeah, they do. And they pass final costs on to their consumers. I mean, that's the way that society works. That's the way that a capitalist economy works. And I know, eat the rich, end capitalism, usher in socialism, the big rallying cry of the political left. But businesses pass on costs. When their rent goes up, when their utility bills go up, when everything goes up, they're not eating those costs. It is slowly trickled in, nickel and dimed in to anything that you're buying or getting from said business. And so I don't completely agree with the president's analysis on that. I will say, however, the doomer mentality that existed early on with the discussion on tariffs has not come to fruition. I mean, you heard and saw the conversations immediately, even before Liberation Day, that the president's going to invoke tariffs, these wide sweeping tariffs, and it is going to completely crush and destroy middle-class America. That it has not come to fruition. We are and I say we, I'm in this class, we are much better off than we were just a couple of years ago, even with some of the additional costs as it relates to tariff. The doomsday predictions, the sky is falling predictions, once again, did not come to fruition. In many cases, nations that are heavily dependent on exports have no choice but to eat the tariffs to avoid even worse losses from their excess capacity. So while the average U.S. tariff rate on foreign policy has increased by more than 5 times, inflation has fallen dramatically. At the same time, I have successfully wielded the tariff tool to secure colossal investment in America, like no other country has ever seen before. By his own accounting, in 4 years, Joe Biden got less than $1 trillion worth of new investment in the United States. In less than 1 year, we have secured commitments for more than $18 trillion, a number that is unfathomable to many. It's a pretty high number. Now, commitments are commitments. I am always skeptical, regardless of whether we're talking about Donald Trump, a Democrat. It doesn't matter what their political ideology is or where they fall on the spectrum. I'm always going to be skeptical of promises and commitments, right? Because these commitments, in many cases, can be broken. And in large part, they can be broken pretty quickly. Stroke of a pen, or in some cases, they're just kind of handshake deals, meaning that if things change, markets and industries change, those commitments can go by the wayside pretty rapidly, pretty quickly. And I'm not saying that to denigrate the $18 trillion worth of commitments, but that stuff needs to start playing out right now. We need to start seeing that stuff here stateside immediately. Again, because we are dealing with this U.S. economy, because we are going to see this as the major issue driving the midterm elections in 2026, those investments have to play out here in the United States. We are going to grab a quick break. On the other side, we'll have more as it relates to the U.S. economy, more on this op-ed from President Donald Trump. However, before that, I want to tell you about the Law Group here in Wilmington and thank Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support of the program and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense. If so, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures that your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. The Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. More of the president's op-ed, plus some of your comments coming up as well as the Nick Craig Show rolls on a Tuesday morning, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. Good Tuesday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for spending some time with us. We've got a really great comment coming in on our chat here today. It reads, Ketanji Brown Jackson, as it relates to the United States Supreme Court. We're talking about this op-ed over at the Wall Street Journal that President Trump penned over the weekend, talking about the economy, which I will continue to contend is and will be the largest issue for voters, at least as of right now, when they head to the polls later on this year. The comment reads, Ketanji Brown Jackson will not vote against tariffs. Remember, she's not a scientist, nor is she an economist. Her only badge of knowledge is Trump derangement syndrome. It's a very valid point. All right, we were under the impression, based on her great knowledge, that she couldn't even define what a woman was. Because you somehow have to go to med school. You need to have a 6 or 8 year degree to become a biologist to understand if there's a difference between men and women. These are very, very complicated issues. So I guess if we're following that logic out, if we're so unsure what the difference is between a man and a woman, and that's, I would contend a pretty basic thing, there's no way that she could possibly vote against tariffs. The economy, I would argue, is a much more complex issue. Great comment. Thanks for sending that in. Back to the op-ed from President Donald Trump. It reads, the world's largest auto companies are now investing over $70 billion in America. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, Micron, Nvidia, Apple, and others are investing hundreds of billions of dollars to build cutting-edge semiconductors and chips in the United States. The world's largest pharmaceutical companies are investing some $500 billion to reshore production of critical medications. My most favored nation's agreement to lower drug prices by up to 90% could not have happened without the threat of tariffs. And in that case, the most favored nations thing has been very underreported. We've talked about it here a couple of times. It is way underreported. There's all this complaining, and justifiably so, over the ridiculous cost of healthcare here in America, the ridiculous cost of prescriptions and pharmaceutical drugs. Most favored nations, that agreement is set to have a major impact if it's allowed to play out in its entirety. So that is something that we're going to keep an eye on. The global retaliation against American products that so many pundits predicted last April never materialized, just the opposite. Since Liberation Day, I have made historic trade deals with China, the UK, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and other covering all majority of U.S. trade. These deals have reduced barriers to U.S. exports and caused stock markets to boom, not only in America, but virtually every other country that has come to the table to make a deal. More importantly, the agreements are forging more sustainable relationships with many of our allies and partners, expanding our military alliances into the realm of economic security for the first time. And I'll once again throw out a little bit of caution. These deals that he highlights with the list of countries, many of those are at this point still just frameworks. The president and his team have to double, triple, quadruple down over the next 6 months to get these deals signed. The frameworks, yes, they are a great starting point, but we've seen very few of those deals go from frameworks to actually in place signed agreements. That has to be the absolute priority for people like Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick, and everybody else. They have to continue to make these deals and bring them into full fruition. The framework is a good start, no question about it. We've got to get pen on paper, signatures on dotted lines. As part of the agreement we negotiated with South Korea as a result of my tariffs, Korean companies are investing $150 billion to revive the domestic shipbuilding industry in the United States. Japan will help us construct one of the largest natural gas pipelines in the world in Alaska to export American energy to our allies in Asia. Europe has likewise agreed to buy $750 billion of U.S. energy to reduce their dependence on foreign adversaries. Countries all over the world have agreed to purchase hundreds of state-of-the-art aircraft and airplane engines from U.S. factories, creating thousands of jobs and strengthening our defense industrial base. Other countries are opening their markets to tens of billions of dollars in American agricultural exports, and still more have become leading customers and investors in American artificial intelligence ecosystems, helping us solidify our dominant position as the world's AI superpower. We are substantially leading every other country. Since Liberation Day, we have also signed agreements worth billions of dollars in foreign military sales. Given all of this, it is simply undeniable that my tariffs have strengthened our national security immeasurably. Nowhere has this been clearer than when it comes to our historic achievements in making peace. In 9 months, I settled 8 raging conflicts, wars, and tariffs deserve much of the credit, including helping settle the extremely dangerous and deadly conflict between India and Pakistan, 2 countries I'll note that continually hate each other. It was the tariffs that made America strong and powerful in generations past, and it is the tariffs that are making our country stronger, safer, and richer than ever before. Given the results of the past year and the spectacular economic numbers coming out every day, every single day, perhaps it is time for the tariff skeptics at the Wall Street Journal to consider putting one of my favorite red hats, one that reads, "Trump was right about everything." The letter is signed and it ends, "Mr. Trump is the president of the United States." So again, this ran over at the Wall Street Journal this weekend. The headline op-ed, the headline opinion piece from President Donald Trump: "My tariffs have brought America back." And, to the president's point, I made this comment a little bit earlier, but I'll make it one more time. To the president's point in the article, the doom and gloom that everything was just going to collapse, the doom and gloom that even uttering the word or mumbling the word tariff would cause complete and total economic catastrophe across the entire world, it has not materialized. Many of these so-called economists ignored large economic issues for years on end during the previous administration. They didn't want to talk about these issues. They wanted to ignore the major, and I'll note major, economic pressures that this country was seeing. Why? Because many of them are bleeding heart Democrats. They're bleeding heart liberals. And God forbid they would put their guy in Joe Biden on blast. God forbid they would be critical. They're, again, supposed to be economists. They're supposed to be able to, look at an economic situation, look at the numbers, look at the data, and I would assume be able to critically think, do some level of critical analysis. They were unwilling to do that. So they largely were quiet for years on end about the economy. They allowed the previous administration to ignore the vast majority of the economic problems that the U.S. was facing and just kind of brushed it aside. And then, of course, the second that Trump gets into office, the second that Trump wins in November of 2024, now all of them want to talk about how Trump is going to destroy the economy. The second that he wins, the second, and I've made this point many times. You can say that you disagree with Trump's tariff policies. You can say that they're bad for the economy. You can make all those points. That's fine. You're allowed to do that. One thing you can't say is that you're surprised by it. The president campaigned on a couple of major issues in 2024. Immigration was one of the largest. Tariffs in the economy was probably number two, or in some cases may have even been number one. He talked about it consistently. He laid out the facts very clearly as to how he was going to go about this, what he was going to do. He didn't shy away from it. He didn't lie about it. He didn't pretend that none of this was going to play out. He made it abundantly clear for anybody who was willing to listen. And there's the key word, willing to listen. He made it abundantly clear what he was going to do. I'll have a link to the president's op-ed over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. That is where you can support the Nick Craig Show, get access to daily show notes and more. All of that available, patreon.com/Nick Craig, or you can get the link by visiting the website, nickcraig.com. So kind of resetting where we are right now and what I believe a lot of these discussions and conversations are going to be as we head deeper into 2026. The op-ed was a good op-ed. Trump lays out the case, little backstory, how we got here, some of the successes, some of the major wins that he claims, and rightfully so, as we head into the latter parts of 2026. This needs to remain. I don't know how I can say this any more clearly. This needs to remain the focus. The president has surrounded himself with very smart economic minds, thankfully, and hopefully those individuals are not getting, drowned out by everything else going on. I know this was going to sound shocking to some of you. The president is a pretty busy guy. He's got a lot on his plate. I think that's a fair thing to say. He's pretty busy day in and day out. There's a million different issues and a million different fires that he is putting out on a daily basis. And so there's a lot of noise. As you imagine, there's a lot of commotion ongoing in the West Wing. And so hopefully these economists that he has surrounded himself with, hopefully the people that are giving him this economic advice are able to kind of drown out some of that other noise and continue harping to the president. This needs to be the focus. I don't make a lot of predictions in politics because most of the time they're wrong. That's just the name of the game. That's the name of the business. My prediction is one that I continue to stand on. If the president can have some of these numbers change, I want to pull up this Fox News poll again. The question was, the question is, do you approve or disapprove of the current status of the economy? This was in the Fox News poll we looked at the beginning of the show. Only 40% of people approve of the economy right now. Only 40%. If he can get that number into the middle and upper 40s consistently, if he can get that to a 50-50 issue instead of a 40-60 issue, which is where it is right now, and maybe even, kind of shoot for the moon, get it above 50%, maybe the low and even mid 50s, the potential and the possibility for Republicans having a successful midterm, those odds skyrocket. Because, again, this will be the defining issue. This will be the topic that drives individuals to the polls. And if individuals feel good about the economy, if they've got discretionary cash to spend, if they've got money to go on vacation, to maybe go out to dinner an extra time or two every single month, if they're not going to the gas pump and worrying about what kind of damage that's going to do for their monthly budget, if they're not worrying about that stuff, it puts the Republicans in a significantly stronger position than they are right now. And so the data is very clear. The Emerson poll, I pulled this up as well. This was the question in the Emerson poll that I looked at. It says, what do you think is the most important issue facing the U.S. economy? Select a choice. And the largest issue, this poll puts jobs, inflation, and all of that stuff in one category, was the economy at 32%. The next largest issue, threats to democracy. As you would imagine, the liberals in this poll are always fearing that democracy is crumbling right in front of their very eyes, followed by immigration at 16%, healthcare at 8%, and then everything else well below 4 or 5%. So that is how the numbers play out in this poll. It's early in the year. Both of these polls were in the field in January, so a lot of things can change. There very well could be a defining issue that maybe changes the election. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I've got some crystal ball that I can look at. There is very strong possibility, however, that jobs, inflation, taxes, and the economy remain the number one issue. Interesting comment coming in on our Rumble live chat this morning. How could someone so good at business destroy the economy? It's a great question. And it's a great point. And of course, if you made that point to somebody on the left, they'd say, oh, Donald Trump is a shyster. He's a bad businessman. This is a guy that has built an unbelievably large real estate empire. This is a guy who had an incredibly prominent television show on NBC, one of the highest rated TV shows in the history of all time. This guy's good at business. He knows a thing or two about business. Now, I will state this. Some of his business acumen is, a lot of it is planted in the 80s, which, there's still a lot to take away from that. The economy has changed dramatically, I'll note, over the last 40 years. So, he knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's doing. You might say some of his thoughts and discussions are maybe a little bit old school. I don't inherently have a problem with that. I don't have a major issue with that. But his kind of economic roots are yes, very well based in the 80s and 90s. Another comment coming in. The tax filings for this year should help families economically. That should push up the ratings. That's an interesting point, too. I mean, it won't be long here before the tax man comes a call in April. And, the continuation of the Trump tax cuts that passed through the one big beautiful bill, some of the other economic relief that was provided in that will allow individuals to get some of those returns this year will be beneficial. The Trump accounts, we talked about that announcement a couple of months ago with Michael Dell and his wife putting in billions of dollars worth of private money to fund essentially savings accounts for children that could raise to the tune of millions of dollars by the time that you've got individuals in their 20s and 30s. All of this stuff added together is a win. But let's use the Trump accounts as an example. I think they're great. It's a phenomenal idea. You talk about really making generational changes. The Trump account is the way to do it. You are taking individuals that may be struggling economically and giving them a swift kick in the ass, a head start on economic prosperity and economic success. Here's the unfortunate part of the Trump account. It's going to take 15 to 20 to 25 years before you see it play out, because the way that those accounts are growing is with compound interest and compounding interest. And so even though the president announced it a couple of months ago, and even though they're going into effect, I think later this year, he's not going to get credit for it, because there'll only be 2 or 3 years worth of compound interest on those accounts before he's out of office, right? That's the unfortunate reality of the economy. Many of the things that are done can take a significant amount of time to play out, to roll out. And so these things are great. The question is, for the everyday voter, which I'll say once again, you and I are weird. You listening or watching the program this morning or this afternoon, you are the 1%. You are weird as it relates to your level of political involvement and how in tune you are. You and I grasp this and understand it. Joe Schmo at a Dollar General in Winnebago, North Carolina, do they know anything about a Trump account? Do they understand the long-term impacts, the long-term implications of setting up the next generation with tens, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of dollars worth of essentially free money, which is what compounding interest is? Do they understand that? The answer is probably not. Why? Because the freaking media is not going to talk about it. You're not going to see a 6-minute piece on NBC Nightly News about the benefit of the Trump account. They don't freaking care. They don't want to talk about that. You're not going to see a lengthy post by a lengthy discussion by NPR about it. You're not going to see CNN or MSNBC do a real deep dive into what things are looking like as it relates to those accounts, because there's nothing negative about it. And it is a surefire way to pull the current or next generation out of some level of poverty into the middle class, which is always what the goal is. Continue to pull people out of economic hardships and economic woes and leave them better off. That's the whole point. But it's going to take so long to play out. I don't know that he's ever going to get credit for it. Interesting comment as well. Creating Trump accounts means admitting Social Security is a failure. That's another issue that we will continue to see play out in the next couple of years as well, which may have impacts on elections as we look towards 2028. Comment, prices rarely return to pre-inflation levels because inflation slows, but it doesn't reverse. The Fed's target, which is about 2% of the ongoing rises, not deflation. The 25% cumulative increase since early 2020 is largely permanent. Yes, it is. That's the unfortunate reality of prices never really going down. They just stop going up, but very, very infrequently do you see prices actually start heading in the other direction. Once something costs something, it typically stays at that level or goes up. Very infrequently, outside of eggs and food, stuff like that. That can go down, and in some cases has gone down pretty dramatically. But for everything else, the prices, for the most part, continue to rise, which is very unfortunate. Some comments coming in on our Rumble live chat this morning as well. Don't forget that you can join the show live on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Each and every weekday morning, we stream live at 7 a.m. Always appreciate, always great getting the feedback in there. It is always appreciated, always a great comment and feedback there. Another comment coming in about the ICE riot stuff going to play a big factor. Yeah, if things don't chill out with that, there's no question about it. That will be a major rallying call for individuals in the midterm elections as well. That's going to do it for a Tuesday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. The Nick Craig Show, as I mentioned, streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m. on all of our live platforms, is available 24/7 wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for the birthday wishes this morning. Greatly appreciated. We will do it again tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock, right here on The Nick Craig Show.